Tom Cruise's relationship with his daughter is in the spotlight. Suri Cruise dropped the surname of her estranged father at the ceremony.
Tom Cruise has jumped from planes, hung off the side of fighter jets, and scaled the tallest building on Earth, all on camera, for the world to watch. He has built an entire career on never backing down. But for over a decade, there is one thing he has never done. He has never walked across a room to see his own daughter. Suri Cruise, now 19 years old, and going by a name that deliberately erases his, has spent the last year making a series of very public, very deliberate statements. Not in interviews, not through publicists, through the life she has chosen to build, the name she has chosen to carry, and the silence she has finally decided to stop keeping. The truth she told without saying a word. Now, it is worth being precise about what that truth actually is. Because Suri Noel has never given a press conference. She has never sat in front of a camera and delivered a monologue about her father. She is 19 years old and is, by all accounts, focused on her studies and her craft at Carnegie Mellon. She is not a public figure in the way her parents are. She did not choose celebrity. It was assigned to her at birth, in a hospital in Santa Monica, under a set of circumstances she had no say in. But the truth she has communicated over the last 2 years, through the name change, through the performances, through who was and wasn't in the room at every significant moment of her life, is actually quite clear. It is this. The man who provided half her DNA is not the person she considers her father in any functional sense. The person who raised her, who walked her to school, who sat in the audience every time she performed, who moved cities and rebuilt a career, and organized a legally watertight escape strategy to protect her from an institution that was closing around them both. That is her parent. That is who she is honoring when she signs her name. And Suri has spent 2 years making sure the world understands exactly that, without ever once having to say it out loud. What makes her approach unusual in the context of celebrity culture is precisely the fact that it bypassed celebrity culture entirely. There was no exclusive tell-all interview sold to a major magazine. No ghost-written memoir positioned for a sympathy cycle. No strategic media moment engineered by a publicist. Just a cast list in December 2023 with a different name on it. A graduation program in June 2024. A university enrollment at one of the country's most respected institutions. A quiet, accumulating body of evidence that she knows exactly who she is, and that who she is has nothing to do with the man whose name she was born with. There is also something worth noting about what Suri has not done. She has not publicly attacked Tom Cruise. She has not given interviews calling him absent or cruel or complicit in anything. She has not weaponized her story for attention or sympathy. She has expressed her reality through choices rather than accusations, which is a considerably more difficult thing to do, and considerably more difficult to dismiss. An accusation can be denied. A name change made publicly at a graduation ceremony, in a program that will exist forever, cannot be walked back. That distinction matters enormously. Suri has given the world a fact, not an argument. And facts, unlike arguments, do not require the other party's cooperation to stand. There is something else worth sitting with here. Suri is studying performing arts at one of the most demanding universities in the United States. She is building a craft. She is developing skills that belong entirely to her, not to her mother's reputation, not to her father's fame, and not to the global celebrity machinery that has been generating content about her existence since the day she was born. That choice of direction, That investment in something that requires genuine ability and sustained effort says something specific about who she is becoming. She is not coasting on a famous name. She dropped it. Tom Cruise, meanwhile, is currently promoting Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, described as the closing chapter of the franchise he has defined for nearly 30 years. He is 62 years old. He is still doing his own stunts. He is still one of the most commercially powerful actors alive. He is, by every external measure, at the peak of a career built on never backing down. And his daughter, the one he hasn't been photographed with since she was 6, the one who grew up watching his face on every cinema screen in the world while he, apparently, did not pick up a phone, is a sophomore at Carnegie Mellon University, studying performing arts, riding the Pittsburgh subway, and going by the name Suri Noel. She has not waited for an apology. She has not waited for a phone call that evidence suggests is not coming. She has shaped herself around the absence rather than being defined by it, and stepped into a life that is entirely, finally, her own. The truth she told the world was not delivered with anger or spectacle. It was something quieter than that, and considerably heavier. It was the truth of a person who decided to stop waiting and start living. And given everything that preceded it, that may be the most powerful statement she could have made. The name that said everything. On June 21st, 2024, Suri Cruise sat in the graduation ceremony for LaGuardia High School in Manhattan, the same school that produced Timothée Chalamet and Nicki Minaj. And when her name was called out to the audience, it wasn't Cruise, it was Noel, Suri Noel. It had actually started a few months earlier, quietly. In December 2023, her school staged a production of the Addams Family musical. The cast list was printed and distributed. The name next to the role she played wasn't Suri Cruise, it was Suri Noel. Most people missed it then, but by the time graduation came and the name appeared in the official program, in front of everyone, the story moved fast. Noel is Katie Holmes's middle name, Kate Noel Holmes. By taking it as her own surname, Suri wasn't just dropping her father's name. She was reaching across to her mother's identity and stitching herself to it publicly, permanently, and in a way that left no room for ambiguity about what she was doing or why. She was 18 years old, and she had spent 12 of those years without a functioning relationship with the man whose name she had just removed from her identity. The world reacted immediately. The story ran in every major entertainment publication within hours. Relationship experts were interviewed about what the name change signaled. Former Scientology members weighed in. Social media split down predictable lines, some reading it as a young woman taking control of her own story, others reading it as a wound expressed in the only language available to someone who had never been given a platform to speak. It is also worth considering what the name change was not. It was not a legal filing, at least not publicly confirmed as one. It was a performative declaration, first on a cast list, then on a graduation program, made in contexts that are semi-permanent and very visible. Suri did not hold a press conference. She did not post about it on social media. She simply let her name appear in 2 separate public documents as something other than what it had been. That restraint is its own kind of statement. She gave the world the information and then stepped back, letting it land without commentary, without amplification, without any of the media machinery that surrounds celebrity announcements. For someone who grew up inside the most photographed family in Hollywood, that kind of quiet control is striking. What almost nobody mentioned was where Tom Cruise was that day. Not at the graduation, not in the country. The day after his daughter collected her diploma and announced to the world who she was choosing to be, Tom Cruise was photographed at a Taylor Swift Eras Tour concert in London, smiling, surrounded by friends, apparently having a great time. Suri didn't comment on that. She didn't need to. How a fairy tale marriage became a calculated escape. To understand what Suri was walking away from when she dropped that name, you have to understand what her parents' marriage actually was, because the public version and the private version were almost nothing alike. Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes announced their relationship in April 2005. Katie was 26, Tom was 42. The courtship was a spectacle from the beginning. The couch jumping on Oprah's show, the rapid engagement, the announcement of a pregnancy before they had even married. By November 2006, they were married in a ceremony held at an Italian castle in Bracciano, outside Rome. The photographs were everywhere. It looked like the most cinematic romance Hollywood had produced in years. Guests included Jennifer Lopez, Will Smith, and Jada Pinkett Smith. The event was covered globally as a fairy tale. Suri had already been born by then, in April 2006, at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica. Her birth, according to accounts from people close to the family, was conducted under Scientology's silent birth protocol, a practice in which the mother is expected to suppress vocalizations during labor, based on the belief that noise causes trauma to the infant. Katie had converted to Scientology after meeting Tom. The conversion, by most accounts from those close to her at the time, was not a gradual personal journey. It was fast, total, and came packaged with a set of people and structures that quickly surrounded every part of her daily life. By the time Suri was a toddler, according to Ron Miscavige, the estranged father of Scientology's leader David Miscavige, Sea Org staff were living inside the family home, not visiting, living there, watching, monitoring, reporting. Katie, according to multiple accounts, began to feel the walls closing in. She changed phones repeatedly to avoid surveillance. She was careful about which hallways she walked in her own house. She began working with her father, Martin Holmes, a lawyer, on a plan that would need to be airtight before she could execute it. She filed for divorce on June 28, 2012. Tom was in Iceland filming Oblivion. He found out through the headlines, the same way the public did. In a later deposition related to a separate legal matter, Tom Cruise himself acknowledged that Katie had left him partly to protect Suri from Scientology. He didn't deny it. He just asked, with apparent surprise, whether she had actually said that. And the speed of what followed is worth pausing on. The divorce was finalized in 10 days. 10 days for the dissolution of a marriage involving one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, a child, and a settlement that included $400,000 per year in child support, plus full coverage of all medical, educational, and extracurricular costs. Legal experts at the time noted that a settlement of that complexity, finalizing in under 2 weeks, was extraordinarily fast, which strongly suggests that Katie and her legal team had prepared their position in full before the filing, and that Tom's team, caught completely off guard, had very little room to negotiate. Katie walked away with full custody and moved herself and Suri to New York City immediately, with a few suitcases and no fanfare. Suri was 6 years old, the specific thing Katie was running from. Most people who followed the divorce story in 2012 understood, in general terms, that Scientology was involved. But the specific fear that drove Katie to plan her exit, with the kind of precision usually reserved for legal operations, is worth understanding in detail, because it goes directly to the question of what kind of childhood Suri would have had if her mother had stayed. Sea Org, the Sea Organization, is described by Scientology as a religious order within the church. Former members describe it rather differently. It is the most demanding level of commitment the Church of Scientology asks of its members, involving, among other things, a contract, reportedly framed as a billion-year commitment, and a level of devotion to the organization that absorbs every part of a person's life. Members live communally, work extraordinarily long hours, and have limited contact with family members who are outside the organization or who have left it. Children of Sea Org members are not exempt from this environment. Kids as young as 5 have been documented entering the group without being accompanied by their parents. The lifestyle, as described by those who have left, is one of total institutional absorption. Education happens within the organization's framework. Contact with the outside world is managed and restricted. Katie Holmes had watched what happened to Tom Cruise's children from his previous marriage to Nicole Kidman. Isabella and Connor, both adopted during that marriage, had grown up embedded in Scientology. When Nicole and Tom divorced in 2001, a divorce that, according to multiple accounts including from former church members, was engineered at least in part by church leadership, Nicole found herself progressively distanced from her own children. They continued to follow Scientology. She did not. The rupture between a Scientologist parent and a non-Scientologist parent, in other words, had a documented playbook, and Katie had watched it happen to the woman who came before her. What she feared, according to multiple sources who have spoken on record over the years, was that as Suri grew older, the pressure to bring her into Sea Org would increase, that the church would move from ambient influence to active recruitment, and that by the time that happened, it might be too late to stop it through normal means. So she didn't wait for that moment. She planned. She filed in New York, specifically because New York family courts at the time tended to favor sole custody arrangements over joint, which reduced the leverage Tom could exert. She kept her legal preparations hidden from anyone she thought might be connected to the church. And she moved the moment she was ready, while Tom was on the other side of the world and couldn't respond in real time. At the time of the filing, Suri was already attending the New Village Leadership Academy in Los Angeles, a school with direct ties to the Church of Scientology. One of Katie's first moves after the divorce was to remove Suri from that school and enroll her in a conventional private school in New York. That transition was not incidental. It was the first concrete step in a deliberate process of separating Suri from the institutional structures that had surrounded her since birth. The speed with which it happened, within weeks of the divorce being finalized, underlines just how carefully Katie had mapped out every stage of what came after. The settlement stipulated, reportedly, that Suri would have no involvement with the Church of Scientology. That was what Katie had actually been fighting for. Not money, not real estate. That single clause. 12 years of growing up without him. Here is a detail that tends to get buried under the celebrity narrative of the estrangement, but which matters enormously when you consider Suri's perspective. The last confirmed public sighting of Tom Cruise and Suri together was in 2012 at Disneyland. She was 6 years old. She is now 19. That means she has spent more of her life without her father present than she ever spent with him. The early years after the divorce were shaped almost entirely by Katie. They settled into an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and Katie, who had been a working actress since she was a teenager, restructured her entire professional life around being present for Suri. She walked her to school. She attended her performances. She was photographed, constantly, in the streets of New York, always with Suri beside her. The two of them inseparable, building a life that was deliberately ordinary in the ways that mattered. Suri grew up in Manhattan. She attended LaGuardia High School, one of the most competitive performing arts schools in the country, where she discovered a genuine talent for singing and performance. Getting into LaGuardia is not a matter of geography or money. It requires an audition. You have to earn your place there. The school's alumni list includes Timothée Chalamet, Nicki Minaj, Jennifer Aniston, and Al Pacino, among others. Suri auditioned, was accepted, and spent 4 years there developing as a performer on her own merits, in an institution that had no interest in who her father was. She lent her vocals to 2 of her mother's films, the 2022 drama Alone Together, and the film Rare Objects. She played Morticia Addams in her school's production of the Addams Family musical in December 2023. The same production where, for the first time, the name Suri Noel quietly appeared in a cast list. She was not hiding from the arts. She was building something inside them. All of this happened while her father was simultaneously everywhere. Mission Impossible sequels that kept breaking box office records. Top Gun: Maverick, released in 2022, which became one of the highest-grossing films in history, and reignited his status as the last true movie star. Stunts that generated headlines globally. Halo jumps, motorcycle rides off cliff edges, hanging from the outside of a moving plane. Tom Cruise's public profile during the years Suri was growing up without him was arguably bigger than it had ever been. She couldn't walk past a cinema without seeing his face. She couldn't open a browser without his name appearing somewhere. The contrast between his total visibility in the public world and his total absence from her private one was not something she could ever escape simply by going about her day. What was completely absent from all of that visibility was any evidence of contact with his daughter. In 2023, Page 6 reported, citing sources close to the situation, that Cruise had no part in Suri's life and had not had any meaningful contact with her for years. Nobody close to the situation contradicted that report. Tom Cruise himself, when asked about fatherhood at the Mission Impossible Final Reckoning premiere in 2025, gave an answer so vague and deflective that the awkwardness of it became its own story. He paused. He talked about having fun. He talked about making movies. He did not mention his daughter's name or acknowledge that she had just completed her first year of college. And throughout all of it, the silence, the absence, the years of watching her father's face on billboards while he apparently chose not to call, Suri went to school, rehearsed her lines, sang in her mother's films, and got on with building a life. The performance that became a statement. There is a moment that crystallized something about where Suri was internally by the time she turned 18. It happened in May 2024, about a month after her birthday, when she appeared in a stage production of Head Over Heels in New York City. She was listed in the program as Suri Noel, the first time the name appeared publicly in a performing context, before the graduation made it global news. Katie was in the audience. So were Suri's maternal grandparents, Martin and Kathleen Holmes, the people who had been there from the beginning, who had helped engineer her mother's escape, who had been at every school event, every performance, every milestone, were all present. The person who was not present was her father. What the moment illustrated was something about how Suri had been communicating all along, not through statements or press releases, but through the accumulation of choices. The school she attended, the roles she took, the name she performed under, the people she chose to have in the room. None of these were accidents. They were, together, a portrait of a young woman who had been quietly, methodically building an identity that had nothing to do with her famous father and everything to do with the family she had actually grown up in. The Head Over Heels production was also notable because of the specific role Suri played, Philoclea, a character in a story that revolves around questions of identity, belonging, and who gets to define who you are. Whether that was deliberate casting or a coincidence is unknown. But the thematic resonance with her own life was not lost on the people who covered it. It is also worth noting what Head Over Heels is as a piece of theater. It is a story built around the music of the Go-Go's, structured around characters who are each, in different ways, trying to live authentically inside systems that want to define them from the outside. Suri played a young woman navigating love and self-determination simultaneously. The parallel to her own situation, a 19-year-old deciding in real time who she is and who she is not, publicly and without a safety net, was obvious to anyone paying attention. Whether she chose that role for that reason is something only she knows. But she performed it under her chosen name, in front of her chosen people, and the effect was unmistakable. A few weeks later came graduation. Suri Noel called out loud in front of an audience in a program handed to every person in the room. The name that said, "I know who raised me, I know who showed up, and I know whose name I want to carry into whatever comes next." She enrolled at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh that autumn, one of the top 20 universities in the United States and home to one of the most respected performing arts programs in the country. Her father, per the terms of the 2012 divorce settlement, which required him to cover educational costs regardless of their relationship, is paying $65,000 per year in tuition. The irony of that arrangement, Tom Cruise financially funding the education of a daughter who has removed his name from her identity and with whom he has apparently had no contact in over a decade, was not lost on anyone watching. He is, in the most literal sense, paying for the future of someone who has made her distance from him the most visible fact about her adult life. What Tom Cruise's silence actually tells us. Here is what makes this story more than just a celebrity estrangement narrative. Tom Cruise is not a man who avoids difficult situations. His entire public identity is built on the opposite of avoidance. He runs toward danger on screen and in real life. He has performed stunts that have hospitalized crew members, survived situations that would have ended most careers, and built a reputation for a work ethic so extreme that the people around him describe it as almost superhuman. The idea that repairing a relationship with his daughter is somehow beyond his capacity is not easy to accept on face value. Which brings most observers back to Scientology, and specifically to a practice the church refers to as disconnection. Former members have described this in considerable detail across books, documentaries, and sworn testimonies over many years. Disconnection is the process by which a Scientologist is instructed to sever contact with someone who is considered a suppressive person, a term the church applies to individuals deemed harmful to the organization or its members. A person who has publicly left Scientology, or who is seen as an obstacle to a member's ongoing involvement, can be formally designated as suppressive. And once that designation is applied, contact with that person is expected to cease. Katie Holmes left Scientology when she filed for divorce. She took Suri with her. The divorce settlement reportedly included a clause that Suri would not be raised in the church. From the church's internal framework, both Katie and Suri represent something that directly opposes Tom Cruise's ongoing participation in the organization. Former senior members who have spoken publicly, including Marty Rathbun, who spent years as a senior official inside the church before leaving, have indicated that in situations like this, the estrangement from a non-Scientologist family member is not always a personal choice. It is, at least in part, an institutional expectation that members at Tom Cruise's level of prominence are particularly unlikely to resist. This would also explain a detail that otherwise seems contradictory: the fact that Tom Cruise has maintained active, visible relationships with his two older children, Isabella and Connor, both of whom were adopted during his marriage to Nicole Kidman, and both of whom are active Scientologists. He has been photographed with them in recent years. They attend events together. They are part of his world. Meanwhile, Nicole Kidman, who, like Katie Holmes, left the church, has spoken publicly about the pain of her fractured relationship with those same children. The pattern is remarkably consistent across 2 marriages, 2 women, and 2 sets of children. Those who stayed inside the church stayed close to Tom. Those who left it did not. That is not a coincidence. It is a pattern with a specific institutional explanation, and it has now played out identically across the 2 most significant relationships of his adult life. None of this has been stated publicly by Tom Cruise himself. He has not, as far as the public record shows, given a substantive interview about his relationship with Suri, or explained the estrangement in his own words. When the subject comes up in press contexts, which it does every time a new film releases and journalists find an opening, he deflects. The Father's Day question at the Final Reckoning premiere was one of those moments. A direct, simple question about fatherhood, asked on camera, with a global audience. His answer lasted approximately 10 seconds and contained nothing of substance. No acknowledgement of Suri. No mention of the estrangement. No indication that the question had landed anywhere near a real nerve. Just the words, having fun, making movies, big adventures, and then a pivot back to the film. What is notable is not just what he said, but what the moment revealed about how completely he has compartmentalized this part of his life. A man capable of extraordinary emotional commitment to his craft, someone who has described acting as a form of total dedication, appeared entirely unmoved by a question about his own child. Whether that reflects genuine detachment, deep private pain, or the kind of trained deflection that comes from years of institutional conditioning is something only he knows. But the effect on anyone watching was the same. It was, in its own way, as loud a statement as Suri's name change, just pointed in the opposite direction. Now, it's time to hear from you. Here's a question for you. Is Tom Cruise's absence a personal failure, or is he operating inside a system that has made that choice for him? And does the difference actually matter to Suri? Drop your take below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.